beginning of the video, you are although he had a sex and the eyelashes I have on today are pretty, honestly, and I'm gonna be pretty blunt, this book was a complete mind. Hey guys, I am so excited today to talk about a book that is not a romance novel. I love my romance novels, but I wanted to change it up. I just read a fantastic book and I can't wait to share it with you. I'm just gonna get ready today. I'm gonna do my makeup while I talk about this book. If you've never been to this channel before, if you've never seen one of my videos, I like to do book reviews while putting on my makeup because it feels more like a personal chit chat. While I'm getting ready, I will let you in on my thoughts and opinions about the book and kind of give you a little background information about what you can expect from it, what it's about without giving away too much, and a little bit of who the characters are in the book. Today, I am reviewing a psychological thriller, and I happen to really love that genre of books. I really started getting into the psychological thriller type books when I read Gone Girl, and I just loved the way that these types of books can oftentimes leave you feeling like they are a trip, and I really feel like this book today is one of those books, and I'm so excited to talk about it. It is a new to me author, and I'm so glad that I discovered her. I wish I would have sooner. Today I'm going to review her newest release. It was actually just released on March 1st, and I read it in a day, if that says anything. I could not put it down. It was that good. And now I cannot stop thinking about it. So, yeah. So I'm gonna go ahead and start getting ready. And as I'm getting ready, I'm just gonna talk about the book. And let's get started. In the beginning of the book, you're introduced to Wesley Gates, and he is the one telling the story. And he is a successful businessman who has climbed the corporate ladders of his industry. He got lost somewhere along the way as his job really became the front man of his life and became the focal point of his life over his wife and over his daughter. His wife, Addie, who is his high school sweetheart, has grown really tired of the distance that Wesley has put between his career and his home life. And she's really become tired of playing the third wheel to his job. So after yet again another argument that Wesley and his wife Addie had, she requested that she needed a separation. She needed some time to think. She wanted Wes to realize that his commitment to his family didn't seem like a top priority to him, and it really bothered her, and it made her very unhappy. So during this separation, Wesley had been staying at a rundown motel. Although he had a successful career, he was staying at this rundown motel because the type of career that he had kind of pushed him to make life choices that he really couldn't keep up with. He was trying to keep up with the Joneses, per se, and he moved his family into this really affluent neighborhood and community, and their house was actually probably one of the smallest of the neighborhood, but he wanted the notoriety of being in this neighborhood. So even though he was successful, he didn't really have the cash flow to keep up with all of the material things that he wanted in life. And for that reason, he was staying at the rundown motel because he couldn't really afford to be anywhere else while also paying a mortgage and paying for the private school that he had his daughter in. His wife Addie was already very hesitant and unhappy with the move into this rich, wealthy neighborhood and part of town because she was a teacher in a different part of town that didn't have the notoriety of wealth. And she was very happy doing that job. Her job had never been about money. Her job had always been a passion to her. So when he kind of uprooted his family, she had to find a job somewhere else, and she didn't have the same kind of passion for that job as she did in her previous job. So as Addie was realizing that she was no longer fulfilled in the marriage, she felt like she was filling his cup, but she no longer felt like he was in return filling her cup. And it caused a lot of issues in their marriage. They kind of grew apart, and what once was a relationship that was based on a very close friendship, they were best friends who talked about everything together. It seemed like they were just two ships passing in the night. He was never home. He was constantly missing games for his daughter. He wasn't able to be the kind of participatory husband and father that he should have been, and it's all because of his job. And he quickly grew to realize that after Addie announced that she wanted a separation and basically kicked him out of his own home, he knew it was his fault. Wesley was also of the mindset too that even though he was staying at this rundown motel, it was supposed to be a very temporary thing. He had no desire to really look for anything else because, not only could he not afford it, but, he knew that they've had many fights over basically the same thing, and it wouldn't be long before they would be reconciling, or at least that's what he thought. But the more Wesley tried to reconcile with his wife and kind of convince her that they could work through this, the more he realized that she was really serious this time. She really seemed unhappy, and she let him know that he needed to find something a little more permanent. Addie wouldn't agree to allow her daughter to go stay with him at this Fleabag motel. So he knew that he was going to have to find something that was more suitable and prove to Addie that he was serious about changing. Wesley wanted to be able to prove to his wife that he would be there for her. He would not miss any more of his daughter's games. He would be more of a family man, but Addie kept insisting that he's made all of these promises before and he's never changed. So why should she believe him now? And of course, this absolutely wrecked Wesley. He was heartbroken because he still was in love with her. And he could remember all the good times that they had together. And he started to realize how much he'd been neglecting her. So because Wesley didn't really take the threat of separation that his wife Addie wanted seriously, he hadn't packed a lot of his personal belongings when he left the house. So he knew he had to go to the store to replenish the things that he needed and get enough to get him by until he could convince Addie to let him come back home. So as he was at the grocery store in a part of town that he didn't frequent because it wasn't the affluent part of town, he was picking up some items and he had a run-in with somebody in one of the aisles of the grocery store. And it literally was a run-in. They bumped into each other. And when he really looked at this man that he ran into, he realized there was something very familiar about him, but he couldn't place where that familiarity came from. And for the life of him, he couldn't remember what this guy's name was. What really caught him off guard was the fact that this guy knew his name, his entire name. And so obviously Wesley was a little embarrassed and just tried to give him the old "Hey man, how are you doing? How have you been?" even though he had no clue who this guy was. Wesley had kind of shrugged off not knowing who this guy was, thinking that maybe it was somebody he'd met in the many years that he'd been in the industry. And he had met a lot of people. So the fact that he couldn't remember everybody's name, that wasn't really anything new. But Wesley felt a little unsettled about it because not only did he seem to know about him, but he also seemed to know about his life and his wife. All he knew was that there was this strong familiarity that he felt. Something about looking at him, it's like his name was on the tip of his tongue. He just couldn't place him. It wasn't until he got a friend request from the guy that he bumped into in the store that he could finally put a face to the name. And he realized it was somebody from high school that was a few years younger than him, and his name was Elias Munn. Wesley remembered Elias to be kind of geeky, and Wesley was always the really popular, really athletic, really liked kid in his school. And Elias was kind of an outcast, and he remembered him as like the pimply-faced geek that really didn't stand out. So once Wesley pieced together who Elias was, he realized that in his life, he really didn't have any friends, and it had been his own fault because he had placed his job above making connections with people, including the ones in his family. And he decided to take Elias's offer up on grabbing a beer with him. While they were having a beer together, they got to talking, and Wesley kind of opened up about what had been going on in his life and about his marital woes and how he was trying to find a place a little bit more permanent to stay without having to sign a lease on an apartment, because he'd be lucky if he could get a 6-month lease, and he was really hoping this separation wouldn't last that long. He was certain that he and Addie would be able to figure this out quickly. But Elias really seemed like a good-natured dude, and he made a very generous offer to Wesley to occupy the extra bedroom that he had in his apartment. As Wes started moving his stuff, his very few pieces of furniture and clothing items into the apartment that he was now going to share with Elias, he kind of caught on pretty quickly that Elias had some boundary issues. It's like he didn't really understand the meaning of privacy. It bothered Wesley a little bit because he was used to always doing things his way and being in the comfort of his own space and his own home. Wesley also noticed that Elias had a lot of really odd quirks and behavior traits. Something about Elias just really left Wesley feeling unsettled. He couldn't pinpoint what that was, but he started kind of blaming himself in a way because he thought maybe it's a me problem. Maybe I'm just too quick to judge him. Because after all, he did offer me up a room in his apartment, and I mean, how could I be so judgmental of a guy who would be so kind as to do that? The more time he spent around Elias and the longer he lived in his apartment, the more he found Elias's behavior even more odd. Wesley had begun noticing weird things happening. He realized some of his things went missing. He kind of thought maybe he just misplaced something, or he'd left it at the hotel, or maybe he never did bring it from the house that he shared with Addie. So that wasn't too alarming to him yet. But then he started having some interactions with Elias that kind of tested his own sanity. Elias had the ability to say something to Wesley in conversation, and then moments, sometimes days later, he would say something the complete opposite. The first night that Wesley got there, they both ate a dinner that had meat. And days later, Wesley brought home dinner for Elias, and it ended up in the trash can. When Wesley asked Elias why he didn't eat it, Elias said he was vegetarian. So Wesley was starting to really be confused. Like, did he imagine conversations happening, or was Elias manipulating the situation? Elias also had the tendency to kind of force really uncomfortable conversation in Wesley. He prompted Wesley to be open with his emotions and tell him about his day and talk to him about anything and everything, because Elias stated they're now best friends, so they should be able to talk to each other about anything. But yet again, Wesley wasn't used to having a friend, so he started to open up to Elias. I'm going to go ahead and draw my eyebrows on, and I will be right back. And I am back, and let's get back to the story. So Wesley started really getting a taste for how much Elias's behavior seemed incredibly odd and how much Elias bothered him. There was something off about him. One day when Wesley came home from work, he had an incredibly stressful day and he didn't want to talk to anybody. He had so much going on in his personal life that what was happening at work was just the straw that broke the camel's back. When Wesley got to work, Wesley's boss told him that somebody hacked into their system. And because of this security breach, his boss was very agitated. So when Wesley came home in a bad mood, Elias noticed. And he asked Wesley to tell him what was happening, what was going on that put him in such a bad mood. And Wesley didn't really know if he wanted to share that kind of information with Elias because, well, it was confidential and his boss was kind of an a-hole, so he didn't want to get in trouble for sharing something so private of the company. But once again, Elias reminded Wesley that they were best friends and they should be able to talk to each other about anything. So Wesley caved in and told Elias what had happened at work without giving him too much detail. And Elias offered up Wesley some friendly advice and reminded Wesley that he had his own business of doing freelance IT work. And so he offered to Wesley for him to come to his job and try and see if he could help resolve the situation. Honestly, Wesley was more worried about getting in trouble with his boss for sharing this private information with a friend. So he declined Elias's offer to help with the security breach. But instead of listening to the request that Wesley had made to just stay out of it, when Wesley went to work the next day, Elias was there. He'd already volunteered to help with the security breach. So Wesley was understandably panicked because he thought for sure he was going to lose his job for sharing confidential information, especially when there was a security breach, and if somebody knew that, they could make things worse. But what Wesley hadn't realized was that before he got to work, Elias had kind of made himself at home in the office, and everybody was just taken by him. He became best buds with everybody in the office, and especially Wesley's boss. And Wesley's boss seemed to rave about Elias. So even more so, Wesley thought, I am judging Elias way too quickly. So the more that Elias seemed to save the day in Wesley's world, the more Wesley kind of felt guilty for being so hard on Elias. It seemed like all Elias wanted to do was help him. Even though Elias was a little overbearing at times, he seemed to get Wesley out of some tough pickles. The most notably being the security breach and allowing him to stay in his apartment for dirt cheap. But as the story went on, so did the unease that Wesley continued to feel around Elias. Yes, Elias did save the day for Wesley quite a few times, but on the same hand, he kind of put Wesley into very compromising situations. The more that things kept happening and Elias was involved somehow, the harder it became for Wesley to try and make amends with his wife it was so completely frustrating and heartbreaking for him because he was taking all the steps that his wife wanted him to in order to prove that he was taking this relationship seriously and that he was changing. But somehow Wesley ended up finding himself in situations that he wouldn't be if it weren't for Elias. And just when you think that his wife Addie is starting to see a changed man and starting to notice the steps he's taken to prove that he wants to fix this relationship, something else happens. Certain things started happening throughout the story that really made Wesley start questioning his understanding or recollection of events. He didn't know if his memory was just hazy or if he was being manipulated somehow. And the more Wesley tried to make amends with Addie, his wife, it always seemed like there was one more hurdle in Wesley's way. It became increasingly evident to Addie that Wesley wasn't going to change, or Wesley kept messing up. He kept going back to his old habits, and she couldn't rely on him. I'm going to go ahead and finish up my makeup off camera because I don't want to give too much away of this story, but I do want to wrap up after I finish my makeup about what my thoughts are and opinions are on this book and kind of give you a feel of what to expect when you read it. So I will be right back. And I'm back. And my makeup is done and I'm ready to talk about the rest of this story. This story took me on a complete roller coaster ride of my own recollection of events. I recognized pretty early on that Elias was like the king of gaslighting Wesley, and if you don't know what gaslighting is, it's usually used as a tactic in abusive relationships, and it's when someone uses a form of psychological manipulation to covertly plant seeds of doubt in another person in order to alter their own memory or perception. It was a very disturbing feeling, but the author was able to convey that psychological warfare and that manipulation really well. But even in the story, Elias was doing it so well to Wesley that Wesley didn't even realize it was happening. And even though I recognized that's what he was doing, there were times where I was questioning myself. And it was like, wait, didn't I read that he said this? Or wait, did that just happen? There were many times in the story where I doubted Wesley's instincts. His intuition was able to tell him that something was weird about Elias, but it didn't give him the warning signs like I was able to tell early on with Elias. I was left with a really uncomfortable feeling about him. He just seemed like that kind of guy that if you'd meet in a public place, once you left that public place, you'd be looking over your shoulders in fear this guy would stuff you in the trunk of a car for your body never to be found again. Like, I honestly got those kind of vibes from Elias. And just when I thought that I knew what was going to happen in the story, when I thought I had everything figured out, the author was able to magically pull the rug right out from under me. Elias's intentions were so much worse than I initially thought they were, and towards the end of the story, I realized they were even more disturbing than I even predicted. Wesley had literally been in a living hell when he met Elias. I mean, he was going through heartbreak and he was dealing with the separation of his wife. But when Elias started pulling strings in Wesley's life and causing things to happen, it was like he was in a living hell. And what was sad is it wasn't just affecting Wesley. Elias's actions were affecting Wesley's family, including his daughter and his wife. The way this author portrayed Wesley's narrative, I could genuinely feel his heartbreak. I could feel his hopelessness, and I could feel his helplessness. And honestly, throughout his narrative, the unease that he started to pick up on with Elias and what he started noticing made my hair stand on end. It truly was chilling. Like, no wonder these types of books are called thrillers. Kiersten Modglin is an author whose expertise is psychological thrillers, but I do know that she has written some romantic suspense novels too, and when I found that out, I got really excited because you know how I love my romance novels. She's written 21 books and 2 novellas. This book specifically is on Kindle Unlimited, and I believe most, if not all, of her books might be on Kindle Unlimited. I'm not sure, but I know that when I was going through her books on Amazon, a lot of them said Kindle Unlimited. I think if there's a book that you're wanting to read from her, it's probably on Kindle Unlimited, which is great for a reader who has never been introduced to an author's work before. There's no risk involved. You're paying the monthly subscription to Amazon anyway for Kindle Unlimited, and if you didn't like the book, then you could return it and get another book. Honestly, I'm like kicking myself for not having discovered this author sooner, because she's genius at creating psychological masterpieces. She's able to trick you with her words. I always tell everybody the best type of book and my most favorite book is the one that I just can't stop thinking about. And this novel was definitely one of those books. This is an amazing book and you need to read it. Like, real talk right now, I honestly don't know if anybody thinks that I get any kind of incentive from these authors that I review in videos, because I don't get any incentive at all. Most of the authors who I've done a review on are very supportive, but I do this because it's a passion of mine, and I wouldn't just recommend a book just because. So I am really passionately saying right now, this book needs to be on your to be read list. I have all of her books now on my TBR list because I want to read all of them. That's how much she impressed me. I just think she did a really good job. If you're interested in any of the products I use today for my makeup, I will list them down below as always. And thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your time and your patience and your support. Most of all, if you have any book suggestions, please leave me a comment down below and let me know what I should read. I hope y'all have a good rest of the week, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.